It is my absolute pleasure to welcome everybody today to this special event at the Processwork Institute. My name is Helene Gronder, and I'm the Executive Director of the Processwork Institute, and we help people go deeper into the things that matter. Today's special event, Personal Transformation, Synchronicity and World Change with Dr. Schuitevoerder, is a special opportunity to dive deep into something that matters a lot. Dr. Schuitevoerder is an international consultant, lecturer, and facilitator based in Portland, Oregon. He has consulted and taught around the world in South Africa, Australia, Russia, Japan, Europe, South America, Mexico, and the United States on topics such as diversity issues, team building, change management, executive development, and organizational conflict. It's such a pleasure to have you here today, Stephen, and to share your learnings about Worldwork.
Excellent. Thank you, Helene. And good to be with you all. I recognize some faces and some people I don't know. Some of you are, I can't see. It's always nice to see you as a presenter, because that way I know who I'm talking to and I can get the responses. But whatever's easy for you is good. So nice to see you all. This is a special time for me. Helene, thank you so much, and the Processwork Institute for hosting this. I had an extraordinary event happen to me just over 2 years ago, quite a remarkable synchronicity, which I'm going to weave in to some of my work and some of the sharing that I do with you. But what I'm really interested in sharing today is the personal journey that I've been through, or one of the threads of my personal journey, and how it connects to social change and world work. So if those people are not familiar with the concept of world work, many of you are. For those people who aren't familiar with it, the whole idea for me of world work is the idea of how do we address some of the complex challenges that we're faced with in the world, and how do we do so in as skillful way as possible. And this is always going to be a challenge. The world is not easy to work with, if you've noticed. We have our hands full in terms of the challenges in the world. And so I've been wrestling with it, and I've done a lot of work around the world. Grateful for anyone, if anyone is here from South Africa, grateful to the groups I studied with and worked with in South Africa around the insights, training, and learning that I had there. But around how do we create social change, what works, and where are our challenges in that, and how do we begin to refine some of the work that we're doing. So I'm going to jump right in. The format of the presentation will be, I'm going to talk, and I hope not to bore you, but I'm going to talk for the next 45 minutes or so, and then we'll just open it up for discussion and questions and whatever else is helpful for folks. And we've allocated an hour and a half. We might use it, we might not, I don't know. So I thought, let's just create the space, create the time, and explore together. So I want to tell you a story about a remarkable synchronicity that I had that touched my very deep in my soul a number of years ago. And how it connects into a thread that started 30 years ago, more than 30 years ago, when I was studying as a student. I was studying process work in Zurich. And here's my story. About 2.5 years ago, I was teaching at the intensive. Helene was promoting the intensive just a moment ago. Teaching at the intensive at the Processwork Institute. And what happened is we were about to do world work. And if anyone's participated in world work in the group, we know that it can be challenging. Because often, and the beauty of what we often do in world work is we bring up to the group very important marginal voices, often voices that are not allowed, not supported culturally, and those are supported and brought out. And with them comes a whole lot of emotion, a whole lot of feeling, a whole lot of passion, and sometimes a whole lot of anger. And then holding this and allowing the group to try and make sense of it is of course, a challenging event. So we were about to do Worldwork, and I thought, how do I prepare the group as well as possible? And I told them two stories. I told them a story about being Jewish. I'm Jewish. And at one of the Worldwork seminars that I was a participant, actually a facilitator at in DC, I was facilitating the large group with a number of my colleagues in DC, Washington, DC. And I remember going to the Holocaust Memorial. And I thought, let me go find out what's going on. And I remember going through, and of course, very personal to me as a Jewish person. And at the end of it, I decided to have a look at the list they have, because the Nazis created a very defined list of the people who were killed in the concentration camps. And I remember looking at the list, and I was shocked because I have a very distinctive last name. If you're Dutch and you look at my last name, it's very simple. It's like ferryman. It's barge pilot or ferryman. So the Dutch folks that are here will look at that name and say, Schuitevoerder. You say it better than I do, but that's how it goes. And it's very simple. But it's very distinctive. And wherever I've lived in my life, I've never met other people with my name. It's very distinctive. I remember when there used to be telephone directories, and you look in the telephone directory to see how many people have your name. Did anyone else do that? You know, I did this as a kid. You kind of look and you say, how many people in this directory have my name? And there was only our family ever. So I remember looking at this list, and I was shocked because there was over 100 Schuiteveorders on the list. And that was just my father's father's ancestry. And I know my family had lived in Holland from the 1600s at least. So many of those people I felt were related to me, and I was shocked, and I was angry. And I was angry with everyone. I was angry with the Nazis. I was angry with the Germans. I was angry with all of the collaboration in Europe. I was just mad. And because I represent, at least as a white man, and I live in the world as a white man, I'm often not in a very marginal position. And for me, it was a relief to be mad, because it's the only thing I could be mad about from a social perspective. So I was mad. I was just angry with everyone. And I remember a specific moment. I was finishing my PhD at the time, in the late 90s. And I remember a specific moment where I went into a printing store called Kinko's in Portland. And there was an older guy there. And yeah, he had kind of gray hair, and I was doing my maths, and I thought that guy could easily have been in the war. He had a Germanic accent. And I thought, I'm watching you. You know, I had all this projection going on. I'm watching you, an older gray man with a Germanic accent. What are you doing? Did you kill my relatives? You know how these things go. I don't know anyone else has a mind like mine, but that's what my mind is doing. And I remember going up to him, and I really wanted to go after him, and he was having trouble with something. And I thought, I'll go help him. And I'm being like a good guy, but I'm really after him. And I said to him, where are you from? And he said to me, I'm from Austria. So in my head, there's a tick. He said, then I went to Germany, and there's a double tick now. And I think, okay, I get you. I get your story. I'm ready. And he said, until they let me out of the concentration camps, and I came to the United States. And it touched me really deeply, because I realized, what have I become? What I did is I took a specific quality, I generalized it to a whole group. I took the quality of his accent, I generalized it to him and anyone who has that accent. And then I was really quite happy to persecute them for it. I was happy to go after him on the basis of that. And then I think about what the quality is that really happened around the Jews in the Second World War. And it was taking a specific quality, generalizing it to a group, and then persecuting them for it. It's the same psychology. Can everyone see that? It's quite remarkable. I have the same psychology as I'm upset with, but I don't like to look at what my psychology is until it's straight up in the mirror. And suddenly I began to realize, what have I become? I've become the very thing without awareness that I'm upset with. And this key for me has been critical. So I was saying to folks, as we work on social change, it's really important for us to do this piece of our inner work. So the group, of course, we did work that day. And the next morning, there's a German guy in the group, very international group, a German guy in the group. His name is David. I have permission from him to share his name. So his name is David. And great guy. And he said to him, he announced at the beginning of the morning, he said, yesterday was very difficult for me because I'm a German and I hold a lot of that agony of our history. And, since the 1990s, I've already studied war a little bit. And I studied a little of what happened to Germany. And Germany over the last century went through hell. The First World War was horrific. A lot of suffering in that war. If you've read anything, there's not a lot of writing on it, but the writing of the experience of the German people during that war was horrific. The soldiers, just horrific. And between the wars, there was a lot of difficulty in Germany itself. At the end of the Second World War, it was just horrific for most of Germany. It broke up, it split, and the German people have suffered hugely from the events of that war. And I really recognize that the world is not as black and white as I'd like to make it, and that it's quite gray. And so I'd done some of my own work on that, and I understood David's difficulty, and I empathized with him. At the end of what I felt was a very touching interaction together, someone in our group said, well, why don't you guys hug each other? And I thought, of course, I'm the facilitator. Here I am. I'm happy to hug you. And David said, of course. And I gave David a big hug. And as I hugged David, something physiological happened in me that was quite profound. What happened is I felt this deep pain in my heart, as physical as I'd ever felt before, this agony in my heart. And it was like, wow. And I went back to my chair, and I'm supposed to be facilitating the group, and something very strong is happening in me. And of course, this is an intensive group, so everyone's into exploring. And I said, there's a lot of pain in me at the moment. They said, why don't you go into it? So I said, you better, this is intense. I can feel something deep is cooking here. I said to them, this is intense. I don't know what's in here, but if I go in, it's going to just take care of yourselves. And they said, sure, go in, let's explore. That's the nature of the intensive. Let's explore, let's go into it. So I said, okay. So I said, hang on to yourselves. And I went into what I experienced, if anyone was there. I don't know if anyone was there in our group, but it was a public event. And I went into this profound agony, this wailing of the agony of what I experienced inside as the agony of the Jewish people over the last 2,500 years. Because I realized when I hugged David, this wasn't just Stephen hugging David. This was a Jew hugging a German in reconciliation of the war. And this constellated all of this for me. And suddenly the agony came flying out. And with the agony, this profound agony was this wailing. It just came out of me. And I just let it go. And this profound agony, and I was feeling this intense waves and waves and waves of this agony of the Jewish people. And afterwards, when I came out, I wasn't very good at facilitating. I was hardly able to, I couldn't speak. I just said, let's do an exercise. I sent everyone off. But it was very profound for me. But in that deep agony, something quite remarkable happened. The first thing I found was the agony of the Jewish people. But then something strange happened inside me in the midst of the agony. I felt I'm not just wailing for the Jewish people. I'm also wailing on a DNA level for the agony of the German people over the last 100 years. This wasn't just the Jews that I was feeling. And then it expanded even further. And I felt the agony of all of us as human beings in our DNA and how genetically and structurally we've been striving to survive. And each of us carries the history and the story of our ancestry in the struggle to survive and thrive. Because it's not easy being human. we've been through all sorts of stuff in our DNA, in our genetics, in our biochemistry over this time. It was quite a remarkable experience. And I finished the experiencing, realizing quite profoundly in that moment that we all suffer hugely and that we all hold within us the depth of the suffering. And as I felt that physiologically in my heart, I felt my DNA change. I can't explain it. It's not rational. It's not, I didn't do any biochemical experiments afterwards, but I felt this DNA in me change. I felt something remarkable transformed in me. And it was a remarkable experience. And as I said, I came out, I couldn't speak. I sent everyone to do an exercise. And the most amazing thing is what happened. That was already profound enough for me in my personal journey. But something happened the next day, which was remarkable. There was a woman in my group also, a very international group. That's what's fun about the intensives, is they're very international. People come from all over the world. And there was a woman in my group. And the woman was from Holland, where I was from. And the next day, she came to me and she said, Stephen, someone sent me something last night, the very day that we'd done this, that I'd done this deep work. She said, someone sent me something last night. She said, I wanted to show you. It was, she belongs to she lives in Amsterdam, where my family also live. She was part of a Facebook group. And this Facebook group was a group of people that lived on her street. And they all created a Facebook page together and they just communicate on Facebook together. And one of her neighbors had taken a photograph and he said, in the 20 years that he'd lived on this street, I actually got the name of the street here. It's quite amazing. He said, it's called Nassekade, if anyone knows it. It's a street in Amsterdam, Nassekade. And he said, I've been living on the street in Nassekade for 20 years, but I've never seen this before. And it was a photograph of 3 brass plaques. Now, these brass plaques were put there by a German artist with permission from the community. And they're about 4 inches by 4 inches. And they're embedded into the pavement. And they're brass plaques, and they're all over Europe, apparently. And these are plaques in memorial of people who were killed in the Holocaust. So there's plaques placed in the ground, and they have the person's name, their date of birth, their date of death, and where they were murdered. And they put them outside of the places. He's put them outside of the places. There are many thousands of them in Europe at the moment. He's put them outside the houses which was the last known residence of this person before they were taken away. And he took a photograph of this, and he said, he's been living on the street, Nassekade. If you walk down Nassekade, I haven't been, I was planning to go there before the virus, and I haven't been able to go, so I will be going soon. But he said, I've been living in Nassekade for 20 years, but I've never seen this before. And what it was is a photograph of 3 of these plaques. And around the plaques were 3 tea candles, these little white little candles you get, 3 tea candles, and some candies. And he said he'd never seen this before. He said, is this a person's action or a recurring commemoration I don't know about? And he says he's referring to the tea candles and what he called the lemon candies. He says, thank you for your comments. Does anyone know what this is about? And obviously there'd been a commemoration because there was candles around and candies. And he said, what is this? And he sent this photograph of these 3 people in the Holocaust the very day that I was doing this profound work. And for me, the most remarkable thing about it is not only the synchronicity of him sending it the very day that I'm doing the work, but the names on those plaques. And the names of these plaques, I want to cry every time I talk about this, actually, because the name in the plaques, the last name is Schuitevoerder, which is just remarkable for me. Even now, I've told the story a number of times. The last name is my family name. And the name of the person was 3 people who I later found out are my relatives. And that's Sarah. His name is Marcus, actually, my relative. and his wife and his daughter. And the synchronicity was remarkable for me. I still, today I think, wow, how is that possible? The likelihood of that happening in that order is beyond, much more likely to win many lotteries in a row than that kind of synchronicity. It's just a remarkable connection for me of the universe. So I felt that story happened publicly. It wasn't my story. It's all of our stories. And I felt like one of the reasons for wanting to do this, and actually also put it on YouTube, thank you, PWI and Helene, for sponsoring it, is that it's all of our story. This story happened publicly. It's a public story. It happened to me, and everything I just shared with you is 100% true, because if someone told me the story, I wouldn't believe them. I'd say, okay, what are you fabricating? What are you creating? This just can't be possibly true. And yet paradoxically it is. It's just a remarkable connection, synchronicity, a connection of the universe talking to me. And I'm going to tell you the further growth that I did after that, but I'll tell it to you a little later. But what I want to do now, just for a little while, is tell you or share with you what are my learnings. So if I think about this, I say, what has this got to do with social change? You know, David and a Jew and a German reconciling the war. What does it have to do with that? What does it have to do with how we work on ourselves in preparation for working on the world? And, you know, as most of us know, and many of us feel, the world is so constellated at the moment. There's so much black and white going on. And understanding the complexities and the nuances behind it, for me, is really, really important. So the first thing I want to talk about is my inner, the various steps for me and importances and moments of my inner work. And I think the first thing that's really important is when we work in the world is to watch our reactivity. And all of us can get very passionate. We can get very self-righteous, at least I can. I don't know anyone else in the group. I can get very self-righteous. I can get very correct, and I can get very passionate about stuff. And so whenever I'm working with social change, the first thing for me that's really important is the sense of being spacious, of being able to take enough space and becoming present enough in whatever form and whatever practices we have to be able to feel, I can hold this. I can hold the space. I can hold the ability to listen carefully to what's going on and not get too reactive. And practicing that for me is a critical piece. So I call it spaciousness. You can call it whatever form you want, whatever practice you have. But I really want to encourage that for all of us, that we create a sense of space. The more space we have, the more opportunity we have for finding out deeply what's going on. And particularly when we're working with social issues in the world that can become so constellated and so reactive. The second thing, and I want to go through the stages that I went through in this process itself, is the second thing is giving space for your own voice. And when I think about when I found out about my family, and so many had been killed in the Holocaust, I was mad. And that madness was important. There has to be a moment where you share the outrage and the anger and the frustration with what has happened. We need to listen to ourselves. Finding our voices becomes really critical. Many of us hold very marginal positions that often are not easily understood in the world. And so having a voice for that marginal position is really important. So the possibility to find our voices, listen to all of who we are, and give it the right to have a voice becomes really critical. I think it's the only way for us to change, is really to truly become deeply democratic, totally open to all the voices in the world, is to be able to listen to our own voices and allow them, and have the courage often for them to come out. So the second thing that's really important is listening to our own inner voices. The third thing, which for me is one of the keys, at least for me in Worldwork, is until I can see the other in me, it's very hard to work on the other. And the example that I brought out there was when I went into the printing store, Kinko's, and I saw a guy suddenly that reminded me or brought up for me that he's from Austria. Remember that accent, Germanic accent? Suddenly I'm easily in reaction, and now I'm the good person and they're the bad person. Can everyone see that constellation? Not recognizing that the very qualities that he has are qualities I have too. And my preparedness to have a look at me and deeply go in and recognize that the qualities the other has are also qualities I have. And none of us want to look at that, by the way. It's very, very hard to see. When I got that shock at the printing store, I think it took me a year or two to really fully digest what had happened. I was like, oh, okay, lucky I found that out. And then I just sat with it, and it was very disturbing. I want to tell you another experience which is very disturbing for me is a number of years ago, I was working with the United Nations, and I was asked to go into the former Yugoslavia and work in the area that was filled with genocide. And I remember flying into, where was I going into? I think I was going to Serbia. I remember flying into Serbia at the time. And I was afraid as a facilitator, because here I was about to facilitate. And I thought, I know what's going to happen. I'm going to meet people who were genocidal. And as a Jew, I don't know how I'm going to deal with that. Because as a Jew, I want revenge. The part of me that's Jewish wants to stand up for my family and whack him. And now I'm a facilitator, so I can whack because I've got that potential power. Can everyone see the danger? I was afraid of myself. I thought, watch it, Stephen. And I remember starting to work on myself. I said, what's going on? I mean, it's natural that you're going to be upset with genocidal behavior. All of us should be. That's not okay. And yet, why will I only get caught there? And then I had a shocking insight. And the insight, if you listen to my accent, you won't hear a Dutch accent, you'll hear a South African accent. I don't know if anyone notices yet, but I'm South African. I was born in South Africa, and as a white South African. And when I have a look at what was done to Black folks in Africa and South Africa by white folks that I was part of, and I can make all the excuses. I left South Africa. I didn't go to the military. I ran away from the military. I did all the right things, inverted commas. And yet I was still a participant of and had the benefits of a collective form of genocide of Black people in South Africa. And that was hard to see. That the qualities that the other has, I have too. Can everyone see that piece? And this is a theme that's really critical for us because it's uncomfortable, because now I have to, within Jungian psychology, own my shadow. Within process work, I'm picking up an emerging or secondary process. So we got to pick up what's going on, because what I'm interested, and I love, there's a quote by Jung that's really important for me. He said, I'd rather be whole than good. Again, the quote, I'd rather be whole than good. But the wholeness means the preparedness for us to become all of who we are. And that's not easy, because not only do I want to be this bright angelic self, but I'm also got the other parts of me that I have to own too. Can everyone see that? So as I expand me, there's space for other people. Now, as a facilitator, I remember going in to a group, and I wasn't looking for it, but at one point in time, I was working with this group, and there was a remarkable guy there. He's doing remarkable humanitarian work. And we were just connecting as a group together and doing some teamwork. And he said, the war was really strange. He said, during the war, I remember, I was part of the Serbian Montenegrin group, and we had our machine guns, and we had our bullets kind of strewn across our chests, and we were in the mountains, and we'd come down and we'd open fire. We'd go into villages and just open fire, and we'd go back up. And I remember working with him. in the group. And I didn't do much. We gave him a lot of space to share his experience and the strangeness of that experience of just going in, opening fire and going back up into the mountains. And then a little while later, he'd come down on the other side of the mountains into the villages that he belonged to, and he'd have tea with locals, and he'd go back up. And then lived for months in the mountains. And at the end of the meeting, he came to me and he said to me, he said, Stephen, he said, I think I must have killed somebody. Now that sounds strange. If you have a machine gun and you open fire into a group of people, you're probably going to kill someone. All of us logically will find that. But what he'd done in order to survive that experience is he dissociated. Can everyone see that? He'd separate himself from it. He couldn't quite digest the experience, so he put it underground. And of course, that's going to come back as nightmares and horrors, etc. And by the spaciousness we created in the group, remember, spaciousness is the first quality. The spaciousness for people to explore we create in the group gave them the space to begin to digest this experience. And what I found is that it was the beginning for me of his own humanity, reclaiming that part of himself. Not an easy part to claim, but reclaiming and looking at carefully. And I turned to him and I said to him, you probably did. And he said, oh, wow. And he left with that. And I thought this was the beginning of a huge potential for him to grow and develop. Can everyone see that? But it occurred because I was prepared to see the genocidal part in me too. That's why we could create that spaciousness. Everyone got that? All right, another one we got. And the fourth one that I want to look at, so the third one is recognizing that the other's qualities in me. The fourth one is the recognition, the ability to walk in the other's shoes, the ability to see we all suffer. It's very easy when we're suffering to kind of imagine as if the others don't suffer too. So if I've got a marginalized position, I'll use being Jewish. If I'm Jewish, I can look at people that are Christians and say, you got all the privilege. But if I ask people who are Christians or have the Christian religion, or do you feel privileged? They probably won't. They say, you should see my life. You think this is easy? So if we start looking deeply, we begin to understand that we all suffer. When I looked at David, I saw that he's not just someone who is privileged in a position, or he holds the history of someone privileged enough to be able to murder my ancestors, but he holds a really challenging history that has a huge amount of suffering in it too. And all of us hold that. There's no one that doesn't. And so when I was able to do that with David, something unusual happens in our relationship by the understanding that we're truly interested in understanding more deeply what's going on in each of us, as opposed to making one side right, wrong, or suffer less, or have more privilege or more rank or whatever. It changes the dialogue. And for me, that was really important. The fifth one that I found was really important was, again, being prepared even after that dialogue to work on the impacts of the dialogue and go even further, even deeper, and really understand the agony, the historical work. And there was something remarkable that happened in that inner depth of agony that I went into in that experience for me. And the thing that was remarkable is suddenly there was no longer us and them. There just was the pain. Everyone see that? It was just the pain. It was just the pain. And as I held the pain, suddenly we all joined together. It became this, what Jung calls the mysterium coniunctionis, the mysterious connection between all of us, this amazing interconnectivity. And it was amazing, just the merging of the opposites at that point in time. Quite remarkable for me. And then, of course, the thing that was confirming of it for me was the synchronicity. The final thing is listening and flowing with the world, and then the world speaks back. So I think as we get in to that river of experience, it seems that the world speaks back to us. and it talks back to us in different forms. And I felt that that form of the world talking back wasn't just talking back to me. I think it was talking back to all of us, that I was a representative of something which is all of ours. And that's why I feel the need to share it publicly, actually, because I feel it's all of ours that needs to be done. So I left that experience thinking, wow, it's just a remarkable, remarkable synchronicity. I wrote it up. If you're interested in reading it, I put it on my website, processconsulting.org. You're welcome to go there. It's I don't put much attention to the website, but it's on that website under publications, processconsulting.org. But something else happened a few months afterwards. So I kind of had that experience. I said, wow, well done, Stephen. You know, you had a good experience. And a number of months afterwards, I had a dream. And in the dream, I dreamt of an old Jewish friend of mine from South Africa. He was, when we were kids together, we were really close friends. We started exploring when, you know, my life turned quite tough. It was tough for me in South Africa. And my dad died when I was 15, and I started questioning everything. And I remember us exploring meditation and Eastern philosophy. And friend and I, how we found these books was just, I'd find them. But we find books and tapes and whatever else. There wasn't much going on. And we had no one knew what was happening at that time. It was the early 70s. And I just found the books and tapes and videos, and we started experimenting with meditation. Anyway, he became quite religious, a religious Jew. And he still is to this day a religious Jew. I connect with him every now and then. And he had a dream. I had a dream that was in it. And he said to me, Stephen, you've got more work to do in your childhood. And I thought, oh no, come on, I'm like 60 years old. It's like enough already. It's enough about my childhood. I don't want any more of my childhood. It's time to move on. You know, as I said, I had quite one hell of a childhood. So in certain ways. So I thought, I want to work on it anymore. So I thought, what could this dream mean? I've done everything I know to look at. What can I look at? And then I started thinking about this experience. And then I thought, this guy whose plaque that I saw, who is he? Marcus Schuitevoerder. And his wife, Sarah. His wife's name was Sarah. She was 29 when she was killed. And Betsy Rosa was 3 years old. She was that was their daughter. And they died in Auschwitz. And I thought, who are these people that have come to visit me in this strange synchronicity? And I started exploring. Only then did I realize that was my dream. Because Alan, the person who came, Alan in my dream, is Jewish. And the key was, there's something going on in your Jewish history that is not done. And I thought, what is it? It's like clues. You know, dreams are terrible. I don't know if anyone else has them. They're wonderful and terrible because they give you clues and you don't know what they're talking about. And then you have to wrestle with this dream to try and find out what's going on in it. And I had no idea, of course, after all practicing dream analysis for 45 years, I still had no idea what my dream meant. But I started working on this area and then I understood the dream. And basically what I did is I started finding out who was Marcus. Marcus, by the way, is my fifth cousin. I started finding out about the history of my ancestors. And, you know, anyone who's been through either Jewish or a traumatic kind of historical event, then that generation doesn't talk about it. I don't know if you've noticed. Like when I said to my mother in 1999, I said, hey, you know, all of my father's family were murdered in the Holocaust. It was terrible. Very few people survived. She said, oh, those aren't our family. It was like denial. You know, this is not us. No, that's not us. That's not us. It was like no one talked about it. No one discussed it. And so to find out, for example, that my father's father, my grandfather, who is a total character, a guy I loved, an impossible character, a Dutchman, to find out that he lost three sisters. Three of his sisters were murdered, my great aunts, and their families. The stones of my sisters, my great aunt, his sister, in Holland too, and her family. Frida Schuitevoerder. Anyway, I started finding out these stories, and I spent nights until 3 a.m. crying in agony at the history of my family and unfolding the atrocity after atrocity after atrocity as much as I could find out. But you see, this isn't just my stories. If we start listening to each of our stories ancestrally, each of our ancestors have these stories. And I realized that no one had talked to me. No one told me. There were little signals, like my aunt, my father's sister had mentioned something. There was little signals, like I have a photograph of someone who was killed in the gas chamber. But there were little signals, but not much. There wasn't much. No one really talked about what had happened and what had happened in the annihilation of my family who had developed in Holland and thrived in Holland for over 400 years. And I began to look not only at my father's father, but my father's mother, Kupate. The name is Kupate. And then I began to have a look at my mother's parents in Lithuania. And again, I had planned to visit. I haven't gone yet because, as I said, because of the virus. I planned to go last year with my brother to Lithuania. But many of my grandfather and my mother, actually, I'm first generation South African. My father was born in Holland, my mother in Lithuania. And the village that she was from in Lithuania, Kaden, the name is Kaden, of the village, everyone in that village was murdered. They were put in a hole and killed, often by collaborators, Lithuanian collaborators with the Nazis. So when I feel the agony of my family, there's two things that come. The one is the pain, but the other one is the depth. I feel connected to my ancestors. It's a remarkable connection. And when I even talk about it now, I feel them behind me. I feel them behind me. They say, you're honoring our existence, because the great tragedy of something like a Holocaust is the denial of that existence. But it's an honoring of that existence. Now, you see, I have two options. Either I find out what's going on and I feel my ancestors and the depth of all that means, the agony, as well as the joy and the celebration of them now being honored. So either I do that or I ignore the whole thing, and it's unconscious in terms of an angst, an anxiety, or a tension that I feel because they're still present. They're just not conscious. And I feel that dream with Alan. I've got more work to do in my childhood. He was pointing to that. Now, listen, I've still got more work to do in my childhood. I have no doubt, but I'm getting certain pieces. So I feel like from this journey, I feel much closer to my ancestors. I feel more connected to them. I feel more honoring of them. And I feel my life is deeper. And that's important for me. So that's my journey, folks. I'm going to just spend 5 minutes more, and then I'm going to open it up to the group. The question for me is, how does this connect to social change and world work? And hopefully you've kind of put some pieces in together already. And thank you for hanging out with me on this journey. It's a very important journey for me, as you can probably see. And it's my honor and my privilege and my pleasure, actually, to share it with you. But how does it connect to social change? I remember when we first started doing Worldwork, and I was in Zurich and we were experimenting. And the deal is, okay, let's find a marginal role or mainstream role, and then let's go after the mainstream. That's how we were learning it. It was crazy, but that's what we were doing. It was pretty rough at the time. And I remember being a white South African dancing, because Mandela was recently released from prison. And I was also happy until I became the white South African on the other side of his, that it incarcerated him. And then I wasn't so happy anymore. It was tough. I remember many of those Worldwork groups were really tough. But it was important because we were finding the marginal. We were finding the voices that could not be heard. And we were bringing out those voices and allowing their expression. And that's a really critical piece of the work and an important piece. But for me, it's just a beginning. It's not the end. It's the beginning of the discussion. And because of the difficulty and because those voices have been so long silenced, when they come out, sometimes they come out with a roar. People are mad with them. Like I was, as a Jewish guy with the German people, I'm mad. So you can see they come out with a roar. And the difficulty is how to allow that roar to come out, because that voice needs to be heard, as well as beginning to understand that if we want true deep democracy, if we want it all, we have to have a space for both sides. If we just silence one by virtue of the other, we've just flipped the coin and we've created a subcontext of a majority by virtue of being minority. Can everyone see that? So we got to really create a world, for me, which is open to all of the voices, not only the marginal, but also the mainstream voices. Now, when I've experimented with that more recently in the last number of years, after all of my learnings and growth around Worldwork, remarkable things begin to happen. Because rather than it just being a sense of guilt and a sense of we should do better, etc., we're beginning to understand what's the story in each of them and what keeps them both stuck. Because if one is marginal, the other can never be fully happy. You can't require to hold down one in order to be happy yourself. Makes no sense. But as we begin to turn this and we create space for both, we can begin to understand not only what's happening in the Jewish people, but what's happening in the German people. Not only what's happening for Black folks, but also what's going on in white folks, that we create these things. What's really going on for us? And not only what's going on in the agony that's represented for women, but what's happening to men. How have we become this way? How some of us become this way? What's going on for us? And some of these dialogues for me have become quite profound, but they require a preparedness as facilitator to move beyond just social activity and social change around bringing in the marginal, but creating a truly, deeply democratic and diverse workplace. And that's what I'm after. So that's what I've been playing with. That's what I've been working with these days, folks. Absolute pleasure to share it with you all and also my personal journey. So thank you for hanging in there with me. I'm very open. I didn't know how long this would take, but it's taken us about 50 minutes. And I'm very open to any questions that folks might have. So how about we just open it up? If you have any questions or comments, and then when we're done, we'll just close up for the morning or afternoon or evening, wherever you are. And thank you for joining me and hanging out with me during this time.
Stephen?
Hi, Rich.
Hi. I'm in Tucson, Arizona.
Great. Well, hi, Richard. Nice to sound.
Hi. It's good to be with you and everyone here. It's just lovely seeing all these faces from around the world. Mm-hmm. I was touched by your story of the Serbian killer. And something had happened, something, even before he appeared, something in him must have drawn him to even dare participate in such a group, requiring openness. I'm just wondering about all the micro moments that could help a person get to the point where he was and have as you say, reclaim the dissociated part of himself. That takes enormous courage and trust. And Mike, what are all the ingredients that have to be in play for such a shift to occur? That's my question.
Richard, I think the universe is the great teacher. Life is the teacher itself for me. That's the one that I'm studying. And in that situation, it wasn't him choosing to come to a group to explore that. That group was already self-selected as part of the United Nations. He was working for the United Nations. So he wasn't planning to do that. So I think all we can do, as facilitators, Richard, is to create the best conditions for that to occur, which means we got to watch what do we preclude, what do we not allow by virtue of being facilitators. And I felt that the best I could do was to take that or recognize that situation where I could have bias by virtue of being Jewish and my own prejudice or my anger rather towards people who have been genocidal, as we all should have. There's a certain outrage in that behavior, and yet so easily can we each fall into that. And so be able to see that inside myself, freed something in the air I felt around. That was my contribution to it. For him and his own life, what brought him there, that's just for each of our journey. I can't answer that, but I can trust life itself. So that's a great question, Richard. But I know as facilitators and as people, for us to be able to have the presence enough to create the space to do that is critical. And thanks, Richard, for that. Hi, Michelle.
Hello. Thank you so much.
Sure.
So grateful. What a deep and comprehensive sharing, and your generosity around offering us, like just very clear, specific support that has helped you, that can help us and help the world. And I'm not quite sure if I have a question or just kind of want to put this in the pot. I am here along the Rogue River, the land of the Takelma. And so, of course, the native people, the Takelma, experienced genocide and land theft and banishment from the settlers of this land. And for the last 2 years, I have been mentoring a child who is of the lineage. His great-great-grandmother is Grandma Aggie. Maybe some of you know her, one of the 13 indigenous grandmothers. And so it has been single mom, isolated. And I've slowly, as spaciously as possible, been offering myself as a trustworthy ally for this family and for this child. And today is an auspicious moment because he's going to start public school on Monday after being at home in the whole pandemic until now. And I have been a gentle but steady support for him taking that step. And yet I am so aware of the vulnerability of this step for this child. He's totally BIPOC. South America, Black, Native American blood. But he shows up primarily as Black. And when I went to the website, this school has that many Blacks. And so I feel protective of, no way to be that person in the room with him or on the playground with him. But I feel the double-edged sword of my supporting him to enter into the mainstream, which his mother and his family do want, because he's kind of going off the walls being home alone as a young child.
Michelle, if I can jump in, do you mind if I did you?
So yeah, I'm just kind of laying this out like help.
The best I have to offer is something that happened in me, which is really interesting. So this is what I would suggest. The only place we can work, as much as I'd like to work on the world, and I've worked hard at the world hasn't responded all that well. Has anyone else noticed? You know what I mean? The world doesn't kind of just change because I think it should. So what I found is that maybe I've got work to do on me. So I tend to start with me and end with me if I can. Not that I don't want the world to change. Of course, each of us does. But it's the question is, what is my work at this point in time? And when I was a kid, I was a kind kid. I always have been kind. And I remember really watching for marginal people And I remember situations where a new kid would come in, and I saw how clumsy he was in the class, and I'd make friends with him so he could feel more comfortable and so he could come into the class more easily. So I always had that awareness of the marginal. And I always thought, what a good guy, you know what I mean? It's all about me being good-hearted, etc. And that's why that's occurring. And then what happened is I realized, but I thought, I don't feel marginal. He was marginal, I wasn't. But that's not the truth. When I unfold my Jewish history, I see how marginal I am. And I see it's so easy for me, and I don't want to minimize what each of us do. It's so easy for me to displace onto the other parts of me I have difficulty with. Can everyone get that? It was, I want to help you because if I help you, I'll feel better. Can you see the trick there? It was, I displace onto the other qualities of me I have trouble with, I'm not conscious of. So when I watch and I see that marginal kid and I want to look after him, what I'm really saying deeply is nothing wrong with doing that. But that agenda is complicated for me. Michelle, I'm not saying you're not clear with this. I'm just telling you where my inner work is. And each of us has got to check it. But for me, what I realize is when I realized the experience of my Jewish nature, the same as when I worked in South Africa. I remember going back to South Africa. You know, I'm a white South African. Now I'm going to support the Black voice emerging. And I had a blast supporting the Black voice emerging in South Africa because that was critical. And then it also, but I didn't trust it fully. And if I went back now with what I know, and I'm sure I will go back at some point in time, I will go back with a different view. I've deepened over the last 6 years since my visit. But what I've learned is that when I see the marginal in me, when I work with and embrace the marginal in me, and I really love the marginal in me, something special happens. I then also I get more spacious with what other people have to cope with in their world, how agonizing or not it is. So then I see this little kid there, Michelle, if I look at him from the outside, as agonizing as this is and as best as you want for the little kid, it's also the little kid, Stephen or Michelle or whatever, that I'm watching out for, and I don't want to mix them up. Can everyone see that? It doesn't mean that we don't have I have the agony for the kid who comes into the classroom or the kind Stephen. Of course, I hope my heart continues to be that way. But there's a little bit of the edge of if I can fix him, I'm going to fix me. That's hidden in my psychology that I hadn't worked with before. So I don't know if that's helpful, Michelle, but that's the work I for sure would look at. And I've noticed I've worked with it and it's changed who I am, both as a person and a facilitator. So the question for me is, how do I embrace this incredible adventure this little black kid's going to go through? We don't know what it's going to be. We anticipate it's going to be rough by virtue of all the racism and et cetera in our culture. We anticipate he's going to have to wrestle with that. And the question is, as his grandmother, yourself in a form, how do we back him enough to be able to do it? And I'll tell you one last story. When I was in South Africa, I've done a lot of work in South Africa, and I was working with a nonprofit, a great nonprofit. And the head of the nonprofit was a black woman. And she took no junk from nobody. You know what I mean? She was a strong mama. She was strong. No one's going to mess with her. And one day I grabbed her and I said to her, how did you get so strong? How did you do that? I mean, you were brought up during apartheid. And if you want to talk about marginalization, that's for sure. Bang, bang, bang. Everything of who you are is not okay. So many cultural messages to diminish you, and yet you're not. You've arisen. How did you do that? And she said to me, you know, when I was 4 years old, my grandmother came to me. She said, listen, in your life, you're going to be put down. You're going to be diminished. She said, you don't listen to one word of that. She said, you are fantastic. I love you. You're awesome. And you're an amazing woman. And you never forget that. And she never did. And she was in her 60s. She never forgot that voice. So as much as the power of the oppression occurs, the question is what's holding us up in the background? Hopefully that's helpful, Michelle. Huh?
Well, it is helpful in that it reminds me that I am also his Aikido sensei.
All right.
Yeah. And so one of the things when we bow in and we bow out is a Shinto practice of 2 claps in which we join with the protectors of peace, past, present, and future. And he really resonates with that, being in that lineage.
Beautiful.
And he loves that.
Beautiful
practice, as do all my students, but he's my only student during the pandemic.
Fantastic, Michelle.
Yeah. So thank you so much. And I realized that I have been putting most of my attention on empathizing with his mother and identifying the marginalization in myself that relates to his mother. And that I haven't, and now with him going to school, suddenly like, oh my gosh, I need to attend to that aspect. So that was very helpful to realize I have, he's just been protected at home for these 2 years. And now I have a big learning ahead for all of us. So thank you so much. Very helpful.
My pleasure. Any other comments or questions, folks?
Stephen, I just wanted to thank you. I was in one of your workshops in Johannesburg in 2011, and I came in as a racist Afrikaner with all of the hurtful, oppressive voice, and I didn't know that I was, and it was just very little awareness. And you brought me through that, and actually the strong Black woman that you were talking about took me by the hand and led me through this whole 3 days of personal development and awareness. And I remember on the 3rd day, everything just became too much for me because there were stories about this one guy's uncle was dragged at the back of a bakkie and died. And that was just like, I started crying. But I had been doing a lot of crying and no sleeping for 3 days because I was processing. And then when I was like in the midst of it, just reminded me of your story now, because I was also in the midst of mourning. I was the only Afrikaner in the room, and I was crying. It was coming right from a place right here. And when I was in the midst of the mourning, you said to me, Isalda, speak. And then there was, I didn't know what to say. I just said, what must I say? I'm sorry, it's my people who did that to this guy's uncle. And but there was such a lot of healing that came forth from that experience. Afterwards, there was like a line of Black women who stood to come and comfort me. It's absolutely astounding. I mean, I know what it's called now. It's white fragility because I've read Robin Angelo's book. But the people were still so kind. And I just made a vow, like an inner vow, that I will work with reconciliation between Afrikaners and Black people in South Africa for the rest of my life. And that's basically what I've been doing. Corporate mostly. But yeah, so I'm so thrilled to meet you tonight. I said to my daughter, I'm not missing this for the whole world. It's such a privilege. Thank you. And thank you for sharing. It's made my day. It's made my week. It's made my year.
You touch my heart. Thank you, Isalda. Oh, it's nice to connect again. I remember that story. I remember you. And very touching. Thank you. Thank you, Isalda.
Okay.
Boy. Okay. Thanks, Isalda. Boy. Some of the stories that we hold. Okay. Carol, where are you? You wanted to share? There you are. Kirill.
Hello, Kirill. Yeah.
Hi, Kirill. Hi.
I don't know how to formulate this question, but the thing is, when we have these group processes and Worldwork, and we often experience this coming to some common ground for people with different, very different positions, and aggressors and victims and so on. But can there be any application of process work in real life processes when, like, someone oppresses me or segregates me or something? Is there any advice on this? How can I approach this person? Not in like therapeutical, not in a psychological context.
Yes, of course. Carol, you know, it's a great question actually, because what I've done is the last 20-something years, like Zelda, I work in organizations that are pretty conventional. And if you get too wild, organizations kind of don't really follow, and then you don't work in them anymore. I don't know if anyone else has noticed. So the question for me is, how do we adapt the form to the context? So one of the privileges of Worldwork is that it's an unadapted form. It's something where people who are interested in exploring themselves deeply can get together courageously to address some of the complex issues that we're facing in the world. And there's wonderful insights by virtue of it. So Worldwork itself it's a special part for us truly to wrestle with some very complex issues and experiment together. However, when we go out of this personal development workshop context, we're in different contexts. And the question for each of us is, how do we adapt the models to the context we're in? Expecting the context is going to change to us doesn't occur. People just dismiss it. They think it's too crazy. You guys are nuts. Forget it. So the models and all the ideas are pertinent, relevant, and can be communicated, but we have to adapt them. Doesn't mean we have to change them. Like when you watch, if you watch me facilitate a group, you will not see any messages at all. And I'm doing much of the theory that I've learned and studied and wrestled with over the last 40 years. But it has to be invisible. In other words, I'm doing it, but you can't see what I'm doing. No one knows what I'm doing. And I'm not explaining what I'm doing, and yet we're doing it. That's the first thing. So the one is how I utilize the knowledge that I gain and then translate it into the context I'm in. And the assumption that every context is the same is just not true. We have to adapt to the context we're in. So that's the first thing. The second thing that's really important, I had another message for you around that. The second thing that I found that's really important, what was it? So the first thing is the context. We have to adapt our context. I forgot what I was going to say. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I had another thought for you that I felt was really important too. So we got to adapt the context, and the models work really. I find when I work in organizations, the models work really well if they're adapted. Else we lose the group we're working with. And so the challenge is, how do we adapt these things in such a way that people can hear us? I'm sorry, I missed my second point.
Maybe in particular, this interaction with the role of oppressor. Can you say something about this?
Yes, of course. So what I do in organizations is I explain to them something like this, and I have models that I've got a few lectures on YouTube also that you can actually look at if you're interested in organizations. But if we have a look at, for example, Worldwork, and we look at Worldwork, we think we have a mainstream role that's dominant, and then we have roles that are oppressed, right? They're kind of underground. And the question is, how do we frame this in terms of groups such as organizations, which are pretty conventional? Because they don't have a lot of space to bring out the marginal roles. There's not a lot of space for that. They just want to repress them, keep their power. Power is often related to rank and position. So they want to keep their power, and we're quite happy with the way it is. What's the problem? And so the key for me in changing it is to understand what happens when roles become underground, when they go underground, when they're repressed and marginal. And what I find is that when they go underground, something quite distinct happens. They don't just become neutral, underground roles. They start disturbing. They start creating chaos and trouble in the system. In other words, just because a role is underground doesn't mean it's silent. Just because it's a ghost doesn't mean it's silent. That's why I like the idea of a ghost role, because the ghost role is creating all the trouble. You know, you don't want to mess with ghosts because you can't find them, and yet they create chaos. And that's exactly what happens. So if roles are underground, it doesn't mean they have no power. It's just their power is subverted. And when it gets subverted, you see a whole lot of systems. So Iselda, I'm thinking about you in organizations too. And if anyone's interested, I've got a couple of YouTube videos that you're welcome to go and look at around applications in organizations. But what happens is interesting. So I explained to the organization, as if you don't if you don't create a culture of listening to those things that are problematic, they go underground and they become symptoms in the system. So in organizations, they'll become people leaving the organization, people being unhappy, people subverting things, productivity decreasing. And of course, for many organizations, the key is you're losing profits. So you've got to frame the importance of democracy from the context you're in. And deep democracy is the capacity and the courage to hear the concerns, be open to them, digest them, and have an interaction which allows them to change. So I've just described Worldwork from an organizational perspective. So that's what I would do. So the idea is, it's not that we need to be good and hear the marginal voices, but the hearing the marginal is the very sustenance and the capacity for us all to survive as a species. If we think about, for example, in nature, it's not about trying to save a whale. It's about, if we don't save them, we don't exist either. We're all in this together. And so understanding that interconnectivity on a very pragmatic, practical level is part of the work I do in organizations. And I think that's how you translate it. Is that helpful? This is not about being even virtuous. This is about survival for all of us. We're interdependent as much as we don't realize it.
Thank you.
All right, my friend, a pleasure. And just for those people who are into organizations, as I said, I've got those couple of videos. I think they're good models. And so if you're working, please feel free to use them. I'm kind of at an age in my work at the moment where I'm not attached, I have no value for intellectual property. This is free for all. So it's what they call free source technology. You're welcome to use it.
Aloha, Stephen. Thank you so much. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Thanks, Dana.
Thank you so much for sharing your stories. I think all of us can relate to what you said, like in our own worlds, just like the plaques of your people, like looking at that painful parts of ourselves. And there's something empowering about it, like you took me, I love process-oriented psychology so much because it brings this really deep awareness to our process of who we are as individuals. And I just want to thank you for that. And like some of the things coming to my mind, I know we're almost out of time, is I've been studying process-oriented psychology and practicing it since probably about 25 years. And I brought it into my activism work, into my community work, into my group work, my world work. And this thought that's coming to my mind is about acknowledging all voices that are in this circle. And this is something that I've strived so much to do in my life because I come from a marginalized group. I'm Hawaiian, and 80% of the population here is not from here. And so we have these huge weights on us. But, something that this thought that's coming to me right now is like, I always do my best to take this other side, what we call this other side that's ranking or oppressing. And what I've found is that when I have compassion, And I listen to this other side, what we call sides. I'm able to do this bridge work. Like for instance, I live in poverty and I have something called subsidized housing. And so I've lived so many places. And as I've gotten older, I've looked at myself as, okay, I'm not just looking for a home, I'm actually interviewing these people that I'm going to be living there, you know, and I've come against walls in it, but in it, I'm able to look at this, what we call other side, and find this common ground. And this story that just is coming to my thoughts right now is I was interviewing a woman that I wanted to live on a farm. And I asked her a few questions, what her thoughts were with some of our issues that we have in here in Hawaii. And she got really, really like, you know, what you believe is wrong. And so I just took a deep breath and I said, well, tell me your side. What is your side? And as she started to explain her side, I realized that people that are in that other place are not always educated with the issues of marginalized people. And so after I finished listening to her speech, I said, are you open to just some feedback? And she said, sure. And I just educated her. I just told her some of the issues. And like, even when I testify, like 90% of us are like yelling at these government officials. And when I go up to testify, some of the things I do is I look at this 10%, these people that are in the government positions, and I'll say, I know it must not be easy to be sitting on this side of the room being yelled at, you know? And so I try to find these common grounds, like what would they be able to relate with? You know, finding these stories that are theirs and bringing them out. And I find that when I do that, it bridges everything. Even the side that's yelling, they're like, wow, yeah, I never thought of what that's like to sit on that side of the room. And I think that's all I'll say about that. And I just want to just so appreciate you for coming up above and showing us this overview of our work on this planet as individuals and in groups. And it's so valuable. Thank you, Stephen.
Thanks, Dana. Thank you. Thank you. But just before I go to you, I just want to read what Christina wrote. So thank you so much, Stephen. I'm German, so your story touched me, especially in that aspect. When you told about the moment when your genes changed, I got goosebumps. It gives hope. Very moving and inspiring lecture. Thank you. Okay. Good. Okay. Thanks, Christina. And so happy that you touched you. Okay. Thank you. Herb, do you want to share? Thanks, Dana.
Yeah, I found myself having a little bit of a devil's advocate argument reaction to something you said.
I like it. Come on in, Herb.
Well, basically what I heard you say is the futility of working on social change. Oh. And therefore working on oneself is important. And I experienced the futility, and I also see the value of working on oneself. But then as you were talking, I started thinking that there actually is social change occurring, but an awful lot of it is being created by the people I passionately disagree with. And in other words, sometimes it feels to me like things are moving in the wrong direction. It's not that we're stuck, but they're moving in the wrong direction. And then I stop and think, I see no evidence of those people that I disagree with working on themselves. And then I start thinking, one of the side effects of working on myself is I develop the self-care skills and the ability to comfort myself. And I wonder if work, in other words, that's a downside, because discomfort, particularly for a privileged person like myself, can be an impetus to trying to do more. So just wondered you maybe say something about that.
I love what you said. First of all, just to clarify, I think working on social change is really important. So if I gave that message, I apologize. That's not what I feel. What I feel is there's two pieces to it. In order to effectively work on social change, we also need to work on ourselves. Because what I see is I see the world swinging. This is how I see it in any case. So I like your view that you disagree with a whole lot of the direction the world is changing. And I have to admit, sometimes I look at it and I think, hey, yay, where are we going? But what I notice is that it feels like pulses. It feels like a pull of polarities. And it feels like it swings one way. And I'm less happy if I identify with this side, and then it swings the other way. And I feel, oh, maybe we got some progress. So I see this kind of world kind of swing one way and another. And that's why, for me, the first thing I mentioned is spaciousness. That this is kind of like being on a, what do they call those things? A roller coaster. You know, it's up and down and round and whatever else. That's what we're on. And so we need spaciousness. We need to find our center inside ourselves, because the world is not in a big rush to change. If you've noticed, it doesn't seem like there's a lot of rush. And so working on ourselves becomes a critical piece. And I think so much change occurs without the depth of self-awareness. And, you know, when you see people like, for example, Nelson Mandela in South Africa, you see remarkable social change people that also have done a huge amount of work on themselves. And the question for me always is like, how did Mandela get there? And he got there through inner work. I remember there's a wonderful story that Bill Clinton shares. He went in his video of introducing his presidential library. And there's photographs of different people. And there's a photograph of Mandela. And he was asked, why is Mandela's photograph there? And he said, you know, during this whole drama that I had with Lewinsky, I don't know if people update with US history, but basically he had an affair with a intern called Lewinsky as president, and he lied about it. And he said, during this time, I was so angry. And Nelson Mandela came to visit. And he said, Bill, I've got a suggestion for you. And Clinton said, what's your suggestion? He said, drop it. He said, don't get so reactive, just drop it. And he said, I know what I'm talking about. And Mandela told him, he said, as I walked through the gates of the prison, that I'd been a prisoner for 27 years, he said, they'd taken my life away, a key part of my life away for 27 years. My people had been horrifically oppressed. He said, I knew I have a choice. He said, I can do one of two things. Either I can go out angry for what has been done to me, or I can drop my anger and move on with my life. And he said, they've taken 27 years. I'm not going to give them 1 minute more by being angry. I'm not going to be caught. And he said he moved on. He said, I know what I'm talking about, Bill. He said, drop it. And Bill Clinton said, I couldn't. He was honest that moment. He said, I couldn't drop it. But Mandela could. And that's because of profoundly deep inner work. The recognition that by staying angry, he was going to continue to be in reaction to something that had already taken so many years of his life. So that's just one moment that was remarkable that Clinton shared, that was just remarkable out of our own work. So for me, it's both. If you have a look at a statesman like Mandela, how do we really, truly transform the world? And at the same time, to the point that he can go, for example, as Zelda, at one point in time into a fairly conservative Afrikaner base and say, I too am an Afrikaner. He can really recognize and bridge both sides in a way that allows people through the whole range of diversity in South Africa to appreciate it. And so that becomes remarkable change when you can do that on that level. Now, is it sustainable over time? Of course not. Other issues come up that create trouble for South Africa, trouble for each of us. But that's the inner work for me that's connected to the social change world work. And so, Herb, instead of polarizing it, you know, how each of us manages to deal with the world in its disappointments and its accelerations for us when we feel gains and when we feel losses is our work. And at the same time, of course, I hope each of us does whatever we can to make the world a better place to be for everyone and everything, really. So I don't know if that's helpful, her, but I really appreciate you saying that so I can clarify it. Folks, I'm looking at the time. It's almost 11:30 my time. I just want to say thank you so much, everyone, for being here. Helene, thank you so much, and PWI for doing it, for sponsoring it. I know you did some promotions for PWI. I hope people heard them, and I hope, anyway, I hope that people are interested in doing courses with you too. And thank you, everyone, and I hope you have a good day, good evening, good night.